Would you consider yourself as a pessimist or an optimist?
I'm a pessimist when I wake up in the morning, and by the time the evening comes, I'm quite optimistic.
They'll have their work cut out, making a soldier of you, pipsqueak.
What a pitiful bunch.
You were all about to be posted to Korea, which is not a laughing matter, I can assure you.
Ever since I made Hope and Glory, I had the idea of doing this period when I was 18 and had to go in the army for 2 years. I thought about it off and on. I always had it in mind to do it, and then you know, a couple of years ago I thought, well, I better do it now, because if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. I was, you know, I more or less was kind of on the point of giving up filmmaking, but then this thing came along. I decided to do it. I'm getting, you know, I'm 81 now. It's quite old to be making films.
That clock was given to one of my predecessors by Queen Victoria. Now some conscript has nicked it.
What do I want to talk for, sir? I can't even tell the time.
We're talking more than 20 student nurses varying states of undress.
Wow.
Excuse me, I see you at the concert.
So you live here?
No, just here having a nervous breakdown.
And have you come to save me?
Of course.
I am going for a swim. Come on, boys!
As you saw in Queen and Country, it opens up, the boy sees a film being shot on the riverbank, and that was the case with me. We lived near the studios, and I was always very aware of filmmaking, and I, of course, went to the cinema all the time. Loved the cinema, and I started really very young going to doing film reviews for a sort of teenage magazine, and then I got a job finally. When I came out of the army, I got a job as a trainee film editor, and I worked at editing for 2 or 3 years, and I was very happy. I never had the ambition. I never thought I could be a film director, but I just thought I would be very happy to spend my life as an editor. And then what happened was that I was working in television, making documentaries, and they then asked me to direct some of these documentaries, and the small ones, and then they got bigger, and then my documentaries became quite well known, and then I became a little frustrated with the limitations of documentary, so I began to dramatize, and then little by little my documentaries became dramas, and then those dramas were quite successful, and people then began to ask me to make movies. So it's just, my career just grew organically. It just, one thing led to another. I think I was fortunate in the time that I started, because when I went to Hollywood to make Point Blank, Le Point de Non-Retour, with Lee Marvin, I was very fortunate because I'd met Lee, and we had long discussions when he was in London making The Dirty Dozen, and I talked to him a lot about the kind of film I wanted to make. He was ready at that time to make an exploration of, and take risks, because he just won the Academy Award, so he was very hot. And when I went out to Hollywood, he called a meeting with the head of the studio and the producers, and he reminded them that he had in his contract script approval and cast approval, and he said, I defer those to John. And so there I was making my first film in Hollywood, and I had complete control. And so I was able to make what then was a very avant-garde kind of movie for Hollywood. And I was, so I had a very fortunate to meet him at that time. And that established me, and then I had much more freedom to come and go and make films where I needed and where I wanted. I've dealt with in my films very much the conflict between man and the environment that he lives in, and the difference between people, the fracture that has occurred between man and nature, that we have lost our connection with the natural world. We see ourselves as separate and different from it, where instead of being as part of it. And I think a lot of our troubles come from that. So I've addressed that in my films, and also I've tried to express the love that I feel for nature, and the conflicts that occur between man and nature. I've made movies in Europe and America and Asia, all over the world. I've made with, a Brazilian crew, a Japanese crew, a French crew, and I tell you what, the differences between them are very minor. Film is a universal language, and once you get over the little tiny differences between one system and another, you can work anywhere as a filmmaker.
Go forth and kill. ZARDOZ has spoken.
All good directors write their scripts in one way or another. In other words, if they work with a writer, or they take a script that's already written, they adapt it to their own own style. I mean, you can't, if you just take a script written by somebody else and direct it, you are not, you have to impose a style, you have to impose a vision, and that comes out of the writing. So it's very necessary to construct the script, even if you don't write it, to construct it and develop it in a way that suits the style of direction. So I always feel that the writing of a film script is a continuous process. It continues into the editing process. When you get into the editing, and when you're post-syncing and you bring the actors back to revise, to redo the dialogue, and you change words, you alter it, you develop it. It goes on, and a film, you know, is a living thing. Or at least you bring it to life in the different stages, in pre-production, in the shooting, in the post-production, in the editing. It's all part of the writing process. In 1970, I spent many months in an attempt to make Lord of the Rings myself. United Artists owned the rights, and they asked me to do it. And by the time I got a script and I got a means of making it, it was too expensive for them. They'd run out of money. And of course, I think Peter Jackson's trilogy is a tremendous, wonderful piece of work. And of course, at that time, if I'd made it at that time, there was no CGI, and it would have been a much different than Peter Jackson's version. What has happened, if you look at The Hobbit now, or a film like Noah, which just recently opened, and you see that they're moving really into a kind of animation. That these films, 75% probably of The Last Hobbit and of Noah is fundamentally animation. That you have, so you're moving away from the idea of CGI having individual shots of CGI. You're moving into whole sequences which are made artificially. And this is where films are moving in Hollywood. And I don't know how successful they are, because audiences are conscious that they're not watching a reality. They're not watching something that's happened. They're watching something that is invented. And I don't know, you know, I think audiences have got quite cynical about CGI. They're no longer surprised or amazed. They just say, well, it was all done in the computer. And the sense of wonder has been lost, I think.
Court-martial has been arranged for next week.
Shift and mallet military prison. Hell on earth.
I was complicit, sir.
No, he didn't. He knew nothing about it.
I said I'd save you, and I will.
Have you no respect for your country?
It takes a supreme act of imagination to think of you loving anything except the army.
I intended this to be my last film because, and the last shot of the film, you may remember, is a shot of a camera, and the camera's running, and then it stops. And that was my intent, was to signal the end of my career as a director. But well, since then I've had second thoughts on maybe one more, if I survive long enough to do it.
This is your guide to hygiene in Korea. The doc said, so don't ruin your life for 10 minutes of pleasure. Any questions? And one lad said, yes, sir. How do you make it last 10 minutes?